Oh, and looks like we are live yet again. So we're a little bit late today. You can see my setting is quite a bit different. I'm actually in the vehicle because we are out. Today's the day for Christmas shopping. And so we are out Christmas shopping. But we are still going live every day this week, Monday through Friday, to talk about some thoughts leading up to Christmas revolving around the incarnation. And so normally this is the point in the video where I would go and share the live stream and all of that. So I'm going to have you guys do that, because if I do that, I'm on my phone. And if I do that, it will end the live stream, because then I'll be taken away from it. So great to see you, Sarah, jumping on. And like I was saying, I'm in the vehicle. Aaron is in H&M, I think, right now. We were just in Winners doing some Christmas shopping for the kids. And so today is like the de facto Christmas shopping day. But I wanted to make sure that I sat down with you guys and went through day number 6. As parents of young kids, you're always adjusting the schedule. So here I am in the car, in the vehicle. So we are having a great day shopping. And so my wife and I will enjoy lunch together. We're about to head over to Toys R Us. We're going to go into the video game store and see what we can figure out for the kids. So that's the day. So welcome to another day. This is day number 6 with the Church Fathers, looking at thoughts leading into the incarnation, the person of Jesus. We've talked through, it was the great affection of the Father that led to the incarnation, his affection for humanity. We've looked at how the divinity was in no way diminished by the humanity, and the humanity was in no way overwhelmed by the divinity of Christ. We've looked at the hypostatic union, which is something we're going to dive quite a bit more into today. So we've been covering lots of thoughts. So take a second and share the video, like the video. If you're on YouTube, like it. If you're on Facebook, share it. Let people know that we're live. And that would be wonderful. It would be immensely helpful. So that is today. And with all this stuff, I find, the preface of all of these videos is I find so much richness in the writings of the early church fathers, especially as it pertains to the nature of Jesus. I find richness in every age of church history. I'm not saying that it's just early church fathers. And we're talking about the when we use the term early church fathers, we're talking about a time frame that lasts from about the end of the 1st century, when the apostles had passed away. Then we get into the apostolic fathers, which we're looking at Ignatius of Antioch. We're looking at Polycarp, and men like that who were directly discipled by the apostles. And then we get into the Latin fathers, the Greek fathers, the Cappadocian fathers, and just the age of the church fathers that goes from about the end of the 1st century to roughly the end of the 6th or 7th century. In there, I think you'd be looking, if I remember right, I think Maximus the Confessor, who's one of the guys that we're looking at in this series of talks. Maximus was the last person to be called a saint by both the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. And so you've got a marking of the end of the church father age there in Maximus the Confessor. And that's really where we get to the end of the early church debates over the nature of Jesus. Not that there were still debates, there's definitely still debates. But in terms of the positions that were solidified as kind of your Orthodox Christian theology, we look at, we kind of offhand use the phrases fully God and fully man. We say Jesus is co-equal with the Father and co-equal with the Trinity, and co-eternal with the Father, co-eternal with the Trinity. And part of that is because when we look at John 1 and we say, in the beginning was the Word. So in the beginning, at the beginning of all things, not the Word came into being, but the Word existed already. That's the word was. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So we're looking at Trinitarian language here, right? So the Word is before the beginning, meaning he's co-eternal with the Father. So if God is eternal, then the begotten Son who was with him in the beginning, meaning he wasn't created, then he's also co-eternal. So we have same properties between Father and Son. And since the Spirit comes from the Father, according to John 14:15, from the Father and the Son, proceeds from the Father and the Son, then it is out of their nature that the Spirit comes. And so we're looking at Trinitarian language, and all that stuff is ironed out in the first couple hundred years. How do we talk about these things, and how does the Bible teach us these things? And this is where, we still see these things happen because we have confessions of faith. We have certain dogmas that are codified, and the Catholic Church still has councils that will happen. So there's still ways that we try and communicate the important aspects of Christian theology in simplified, like even in the charismatic church, because there's been so much craziness over prophetic ministry. It was about 2 years ago, I think, that Michael Brown and a few others came together and put together a series of principles of prophetic ministry, what we think about when it comes to prophetic ministry. And a whole bunch of people signed on saying, yeah, we agree and we affirm this. So there's still some of that happens. Now, just because we sign on in agreement doesn't mean our practices change and all of those. So there's certain limitations of that. But what we see in the early church where they're going, we need to figure out and wrestle with what kind of language we use to describe what the apostles taught. And it's like, what would happen is that they could tell when someone would teach something that was off base, and that would cause a whole bunch of people to come together and say, well, what can we talk about? What can we say when it comes to what this actually is? And so that's how the church ended up developing language to talk about the Trinity. And so what we're looking at is the flow of what that looks like. And so we're going through this right here, 10 Days with the Church Fathers. We're on day number 6. A link for the PDF is in the video description, should be in the video description. I'm hoping, and the way I set it up, I haven't done it from the phone before, or a donation of any amount to the ministry. And we're coming up to year end, so if you're thinking about some final contributions for the year, you can consider Wind as a place that you would do that, and we'll send you one of these devotionals free of charge while supplies last. We'll just send it to you. So we have those, and then we've just put out a few new resources to mark the end of the year. We have a new course called Wisdom from the Patristics, going through how the church fathers thought and taught about the spiritual gifts, presenting a broad overview of the different perspectives and what that looked like. And so you can find a link in the video description here. And then we've just put out the Silent Fire Collection book, which is the full collection. I think actually I just got a notification that our Wind store stock just came in today. So when I get back to the office, I'll be able to check that out. But we've just put that out. It's a series of devotional readings on the lives of the early church, or the Desert Fathers and the Desert Mothers, which is a time frame within the early church. So you can pick that up on Amazon. The link for the Amazon is in the episode description below, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. So those are all the resources you can check out there, and I just invite you to click on those things. So our thought for today, day 6. This is a quote from Leo the Great, and the topic at hand is equality with the Father does not forgo the nature of humanity. And we've been kind of hitting this home from different perspectives the last few days. So here we go. This is what Leo said. For each form does what is proper to it with the cooperation of the other. That is, the Word performing what pertains to the Word, and the flesh carrying out what pertains to the flesh. One of them sparkles with miracles, the other succumbs to injuries. And as the Word does not cease to be on an equality with his Father's glory, so the flesh does not forgo the nature of our race. And so that we've been talking about this, that the divinity does not diminish the humanity, and the humanity does not diminish the divinity. So when we look at the person of Jesus, we see examples of the divinity on display, and we see examples of the humanity on display from the get-go, really, right? Because the first example we have of Jesus is him stunning people with teaching in the temple when he was the age of 12. So right there we have, 12-year-olds are not really known for their stunning teaching, especially against some of the best teachers in the known world of the day. So we've got an example of the divinity on display as a young boy. And we have examples of the divinity on display when he calms the wind and the waves. And it says ostensibly they recognize the voice of their creator. But right before that, we have an example of his humanity where he's sleeping, right? So we could say, well, does God sleep? Well, in the person of Jesus, he does. And so the issue at hand when it comes to understanding this, and people have either emphasize the humanity or emphasize the divinity. One tends to get emphasized at the expense of the other. It's great to see you, Randy. So when it comes to the person of Jesus, one tends to get emphasized over against the other, that's what leads into error when it comes to understanding theologically the nature of Jesus. And so this is where looking at the church fathers could be super helpful. So according, like what Leo says, each form does what is proper to the cooperation of the other. So the divinity of God happens and the humanity of God happens in conjunction. And so the argument really, when it comes to how we understand the cooperation of the natures of God, the two natures within Jesus, is summed up in one person, two natures. And there was Greek words and Latin words that were being argued through to codify this. The word prosopon, which means person, the what you present, the personhood, what you present to the world. Ousia, physis, something like that. These are essence, nature, person. All of these words were trying to be wrestled with in the first 500-600 years of Christian history. And so what the church settled on, and the language we use today, is one person, two natures. And those two natures are perfectly at rest and at peace with each other. And then for the language of that, we look at Ephesians 3, or Ephesians 1, 2, and 3, where it talks about the separation between God and man has been taken care of in the person of Jesus. We look at Colossians 2, where in bodily form, the fullness of the Godhead dwelt. So we see the union of flesh and the union of God. Now, one of the things we need to address there too is that in John 1, when John 1 talks about hey, Susan, it's great to see you. In John 1, when John talks about the word becoming flesh, that word for flesh in the Greek is the Greek word sarx, and it's the same word that Paul uses in Romans 7 when he talks about struggling with fleshly things. And so the word flesh has a lot of different connotations throughout Scripture. So in some particular passages, it speaks of the carnal nature, or the capacity for humanity to be tempted and to fall. And in some instances, it talks about how all flesh will be saved, right? That's another term that uses. So that's not necessarily talking about carnal nature. That's just talking about humanity in general. So the word flesh, when it's used in Scripture, doesn't mean this body. That's not what it's talking about. It doesn't mean to say that he took on a body, and so that he was a body without humanity. The word sarx means everything that it means to be human: body, soul, mind, will, emotions. When it says the word took on human flesh, it's saying the word took on everything it meant to be human. And so what Leo developed was what became known as the communication of idioms. That's the theological term. The communication of idioms. It essentially says that what we say about the man, we can say about the God, as long as we understand it's always in reference to the incarnation. So what we can say about God, we can say about the God part of Jesus and the human part of Jesus is we can say this. So we can say in the boat, God slept, right? And And during the storm, the man commanded and spoke to the weather. So what we can say about the God portion of Jesus, we can say about the man portion of Jesus. When we say about the man portion of Jesus, we can say about the God portion of Jesus, because there wasn't a um, otherwise what happens is it's like we start talking about two different people. If we can't say, we can say the Son of Man descended, and we can say the Son of God was died and was crucified and died and rose again. So if we can't say about the Son of Man or the human part of Jesus what we say about the divine or the God part of Jesus, then what happens is we start talking about two people. And that's where things become very confusing, is we're starting to separate the actual personhood. And when we separate the personhood, and so we separate, well, okay, we can only say certain things about the human Jesus and certain things about the God Jesus. Now we're talking about two people, and now the human Jesus isn't the full picture of God. So this is where it becomes super important in our language. The communication of idioms really helps us to understand that. And these are the kind of things that really undergird when we read scripture as a 21st century evangelical Christian. When we read scripture, we read these things into the scripture without realizing that there's a whole framework that's been handed to us to read them. So what I'm trying to understand and explain to you is that here's the framework for thinking about the nature of Jesus. So the communication of idioms, and one of the things that got one of the early church fathers, Cyril of Alexandria, into a lot of hot water was there was an argument between two different regions in Christianity. Those were the Latin fathers and the Greek fathers, the Antiochian fathers and the Alexandrian fathers. And the problem that they had is that they both conceived of Jesus as a God man in different ways. And so what Nestorius, who was representing the Antiochian fathers, said was, well, we can't say God was born because that's improper to talk about the deity that way. And what the Cyril said is that if we don't say God was born, then we have no redemption story. And so they both, they were trying to be favorable to each other, but they, as ego-driven men tend to do, is they really started arguing and butting heads with each other, and they both threatened to excommunicate each other. So they're a perfect example of how not to handle conflict, by the way, in the 5th century, 5th century. So, but what Cyril said that was absolutely true, and what led into Leo's thoughts, was that what we can say about God is that God wept, God died, and God nursed at the breast of Mary. And that was radically offensive to the Antiochians, because how can you talk about God that way? But to the Alexandrians, it was totally necessary to talk about God that way. So what we say about the man, we say about the God, and what we say about the God, we say about the man, because we can't separate them into two distinct people. They have to be one person, because it's not two personalities, it's not two personhoods, it's not two different displays. Jesus came and explained exactly how God is and was, in the time that he did. Not that he's changed. Jesus came and explained exactly how he is. That's John 1 says that. Hebrews says that he's the express image of the Father, and John 1 says that he came and declared or explained to us the way God is. I think that's John 1:18. So it's really, it seems like, well, why is this important? Well, it's not important in the sense that it's something you think about every day, but it's important in the sense that it has vast ramifications for how we talk about the incarnation and the nature of deity. God died, God wept. So when we see Jesus weeping, and they're talking about, at that point, Lazarus, when we see Jesus weeping, that seems like a distinctly human expression, right? But as a distinctly human expression, it also communicates to us how God is. So Jesus weeping is God weeping. Jesus dying is God dying. And there was some need to nuance that out. It's not the Father dying on the cross, it's the Son dying on the cross, but it's not just a human dying on the cross, it's God dying on the cross. And Hebrews 9 actually is another place that helps us understand this. Hebrews 9:16, where it says that where there's a will or a covenant, there's of necessity the death of the maker of the covenant in order for the covenant to be in effect, right? With it, the word for will and covenant are the same thing. For a will to be in effect, the person who created the will has to die, right? Like that's how a will works. If I have a will and I will my possessions to someone, I have to die for that will to be in effect. So what Hebrews 9:16 is saying is that the one who established the will, which the will would be all the promises that are promised through the nation of Israel. This is the covenant promises. Again, the word for covenant and the word for will are the same things. They're interchangeable. Actually, if you read Hebrews 9:16 in the ESV, it translates the word as will. And if you read it in the New King James, it translates it as covenant because it's the same word in the Greek. So God establishes a will that says these are all the promises for you, and then he ties in the promises to the fulfillment of their duties to the temple to keep them in relation to God. And then Jesus comes on the scene, he dies so that the promises through the will are enacted, because the one who established the promises is God. So God has to die in order for the will to be in effect. But since God isn't subject to death, he takes on the nature of humanity, and then God dies on our behalf so that the will comes into effect. All the promises can come into us through the person of Jesus. So that's why all of those things, understanding the nature of redemption, understanding that we have been united with his spirit, understanding the capacity of mankind to now operate in the gifts of God, understanding the capacity of mankind to overcome sin, all of these things are wrapped up in a clear understanding that God and man, united in the person of Jesus, are not two distinct things we talk about, but one person who demonstrates to us what God is like. So what happens again is that we start talking about it in ways that diminishes one or the other, and we start to lose the flavor of redemption that Jesus brings. And therein, that's where people got really up in arms about that. So that's what Leo had to say. That's against the communication of idioms. What we say about God, we can say about what we say about the divinity of Jesus, we can say about the humanity of Jesus. What we say about the humanity of Jesus, we can say about the divinity of Jesus, because it's one person doing both of those things. And we can say God slept because in the incarnation, God slept. And we can say that the man Jesus healed because in the incarnation, he healed. So those things are perfectly united. And the Antiochian distinction was that there was one nature. This is where they argued, is in the Antiochian, represented by Nestorius, is that there was one nature that was united. And so basically saying the God nature and the man nature became one nature in Jesus. The Alexandrian position, which is the one that the church affirms today, is that in the person of Jesus, the God nature and the man nature united but remained distinct. And so we can talk about both of those things being fulfilled in one person. So it's the person we talk about, not the natures that we talk about. And again, it seems nuanced, and it is nuanced, but when it comes to understanding the incarnation and the story God was telling, it's actually vitally important. So those are my thoughts for today. Tomorrow we've got another doozy. I think we have always got a doozy on our hands when we talk about this stuff. And day 7 is Maximus the Confessor and how humanity is saved by his divinity. And so we're going to dive into that yet again. And so as always, thank you for tuning in. And if you've just been tuning in, we've been talking about our 10 days with the Church Fathers series, and offering different thoughts on the incarnation through the lens of the patristic theology summed up in Leo the Great and Maximus the Confessor. Today was Leo the Great, and we were talking about the communication of idioms. The communication of idioms, meaning that the language we use for the idiom means language. So the language we use for the humanity and the idiom, the language we use for the divinity, can communicate to each other. They're connected, right? They communicate to each other. So that's what that means. There's a couple other technical terms for it that I can't think of off the top of my head, but God wept, God died, God nursed at the breast of Mary. If you take anything away, that's what we can say about God, and that is accurate terminology that helps us understand the story of redemption and the incarnation. So it's it's good to see everybody on. And well, check out the links. The Silent Fire collection, you can pick that up. There should be time. Hopefully, there's time to get it before Christmas. There may be. Um, if you order it today or tomorrow, you might be able to get it. And so we will, and we'll be back tomorrow at noon Atlantic time, 11 Eastern time, and 8 Pacific, to continue talking about how we understand what undergirds our presuppositions about theology leading into the incarnation, to help you appreciate even more what God accomplished in the womb of a woman. And so that's a beautiful thing. So until tomorrow, we will see you next time. Bye.